caloric intake perhaps below basal metabolic rate, then Trenbolone Masteron and Winstrol can go up to 3 milligrams per 1 pound of body weight. Welcome to Vigorous PEDs. I'm Coach Steve, and this is the last video about Trenbolone in the Trenbolone Profile video series. And I think it will be the last video that I do about Trenbolone unless there's some sort of new data out there that, makes it interesting to talk about the Trenbolone again after this video series. So this is the video that you've all been waiting for, the dosing protocols video and how to incorporate Trenbolone in your off-season or your cutting phase or contest prep, and which other performance-enhancing drugs go well along with Trenbolone, whether they complement Trenbolone or mitigate some of the side effects. We'll discuss that all in this video. But before we get into it, you guys know me, I like health, and I want to give you guys a fair warning, even though, man, how many videos did I discussing about Trenbolone side effects? So we already discussed that. I'm just going to give you guys a shopping list of things you need to purchase and spend money on before you consider to use Trenbolone. Now, a lot of guys that have already used Trenbolone already know part of this shopping list, but I will remind it for you guys again. I'll put it up the screen as well so you guys can follow along and take notes and compose your own shopping list. First, of course, you need to purchase Trenbolone, but before you get to use it, you should find a place to do blood work before, during, and after your Trenbolone cycle. Before, to determine if you're healthy enough to take Trenbolone. If you're not healthy, you shouldn't take Trenbolone, period. If your kidney function is off, your liver function is off, your hematocrit is high, your lipids are skewed, you should not use Trenbolone because Trenbolone is going to worsen all of these markers. So make sure you're in a good or perfect, ideally perfect state of health before adding Trenbolone into your protocol. And that's blood work before, during, and after. If you can't afford blood work before, during, and after, you shouldn't use Trenbolone. You should just stick with testosterone, which is a compound your body was already producing naturally to a certain extent. Maybe you were not happy with your numbers and supplementing some exogenous testosterone on top. But for 99% of the people, testosterone is still going to be the base. And you shouldn't consider a Trenbolone only cycle. You still need a little bit of testosterone for estradiol conversion. Right, blood work, number 1. Second on your shopping list should be a place to do donations, whether that's through the Red Cross, where you can do a donation or a Power donation to get your hematocrit under control just in case, or find a clinic or a hospital where you can do a therapeutic phlebotomy in case your hematocrit goes high. Again, it's not a given that your hematocrit goes high, but if your hematocrit was already reasonably high on testosterone, you should definitely have a place where you can release a little bit of this hematocrit in a donation bag or a therapeutic phlebotomy bag. Or you have to take your destiny into your own hands and find a donation kit online. I'm not going to tell you where to get it. If you're experienced enough, you should be able to find it by yourself and do a donation at home by yourself or through your generous rogue nurse, which is a connection that I have. So if I need to do a donation, I can't go through the Red Cross. Requesting a therapeutic phlebotomy is annoying or impossible, depending on the doctor that you talk with. So I have a rogue nurse to do that for me in case you need to find a place or a method to donate blood because you might need to donate frequently. Another thing you should purchase, everybody should have one of these, before you purchase Trenbolone is a blood pressure monitor. Now, I prefer a blood pressure monitor that goes around the wrist. Omron has several different blood pressure monitors that goes around the wrist because an arm of, it's probably only 15 inches right now, but, an arm of, a little bit bigger than average, 18, I'm going to give it 18, now that I'm 460 nanograms per deciliter on my total testosterone. I fingers crossed it's still 18, but it's probably 50. Anyway, even a 15-inch arm that's mostly muscle, a blood pressure monitor that goes around your arm is not going to be as accurate as a blood pressure monitor that goes around your wrist. Now, you can do a comparative analysis by yourself. You buy the blood pressure monitor around your wrist, and you buy a blood pressure monitor that goes around your arm, and you take the average. That's probably the best way going forward, but I have a blood pressure monitor that goes around the wrist, And like we discussed in the Trenbolone laundry list of common side effects video, you'll also need a full body towel and a fan so you can keep the tren sweats at bay during the night and not feed into your trensomnia and not feed into your tren rage. So a full body towel and a fan helps to keep your mood under control as well, and you should have that available before you add the Trenbolone in. You'll also need a Ventolin or salbutamol inhaler in the case of tren cough. Already discussed that into depth in the tren cough video. You should be able to purchase those on the online pharmacies. No, YouTube is not the right place to ask, and if you don't have the experience to find an online pharmacy where you can buy Ventolin or a salbutamol inhaler, Trenbolone is not for you. It's not in the cards, and you should get a little bit of experience on how to acquire certain compounds. Another important thing that you need to have is vitamin B6 P5P at the minimum. You start that 1 month before you're adding in Trenbolone as part of your PED protocol, because vitamin B6 P5P will promote dopamine formation, and of course dopamine will help to keep your prolactin secretion under control. Now, it's not as potent as when you get into the higher dosages of Trenbolone use during a cutting phase. Now, I'll be honest, vitamin B6 P5P might not be potent enough to keep your prolactin secretion under control when your Trenbolone dosages are a little bit higher, or you're, one of those guys that likes to combine the Trenbolone with Ment and Nandrolone and for all this progestogenic activity that's all over the map, and your prolactin levels will, fluctuate so high, like the Bitcoin chart, for example. So you should start vitamin B6 P5P well ahead at 200 to 300 milligrams per day, let's say 4 weeks before you introduce the Trenbolone, and keep a dopamine receptor agonist on hand like a Cabergoline, a Bromocipherine, or a Pramipexole in case prolactin still goes high when the Trenbolone dosages increases during a cutting phase. During the off-season, they don't have to be that high. And I think most people can get away with vitamin B6 P5P during the off-season, unless you're smoking weed or taking kratom to take the edge off Trenbolone, and then, those recreational drugs also increase prolactin secretion. So keep that in mind for the guys that like to use recreational drugs to keep their mood under control or take the edge off Trenbolone, like weed or kratom. All these compounds are known to increase prolactin levels, and vitamin B6 P5P might not be potent enough to keep your prolactin levels under control. And you might need a Cabergoline, a Bromocipherine, or a Pramipexole to do that for you. It's probably better to, keep your Trenbolone dosages low so you don't have so many mood changes, and then you don't need any weed or kratom to bring you down. That will be the healthy approach and my recommendation going forward. Another supplement that I found is to be highly valuable is serotonin. We already discussed that in the tren rage video, where I feel that trensomnia contributes to tren rage. And if you're able to sleep with the supplementation protocol that I laid out in that video, you should be able to keep your tren rage under control. So moderate dosages of tren, no weed or kratom, and I would prefer 100 to 200 milligrams of serotonin instead, unless you're on a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and then it's, really not a good combination. But Trenbolone and SSRIs are not a good combination as well. Other supplements that you need to purchase before you start getting your hands dirty with Trenbolone is either apple cider vinegar or betaine hydrochloride, or both. Because even moderate dosages of Trenbolone is going to cause acid reflux. Now, during the off-season, it's not as common because your food volume is a little bit higher. But during a cutting phase, when your protein is a little bit higher, which makes changes the acidity of your stomach, you might not be able to produce enough stomach acid, and you need to supplement stomach acid in the form of an apple cider vinegar tablet or betaine hydrochloride tablet, perhaps with pepsin to help break down the protein and keep your stomach acid levels under control so you don't get this acid reflux. Again, purchase that well ahead of time so you don't have to, dive into the proton pump inhibitors and then you're on 40 milligrams of Nexium per day. There's no Nexium on this list if you get your apple cider vinegar and betaine hydrochloride in the cupboard and supplement that in 20 minutes before each meal when you're on the Trenbolone sandwich. And when you take a hefty Trenbolone sandwich, you might need to double the dose of apple cider vinegar to get your stomach acid under control. Keep that in mind, guys. It's very essential that you take this because proton pump inhibitors are not a sustainable route. You might need to take it once in a while if your acid reflux is really, really bad. But proton pump inhibitors will reduce stomach acid levels tremendously, resulting in, you not being able to absorb a lot of these micronutrients, and then you get very low calcium levels, very low magnesium levels, and now your blood pressure is, out of control. So apple cider vinegar instead of a proton pump inhibitor to make sure you get all your micronutrients from your diet when Trenbolone changes your stomach acidity. Another essential purchase that is a huge part of this shopping list before you decide to add Trenbolone to your performance-enhancing drug protocol are methods to get your cholesterol under control. Now, that can be in the form of supplementation, over-the-counter supplementations, or medications which you probably need to purchase through an online pharmacy. During the off-season, when Trenbolone intake is 0 or moderate, citrus bergamot might be potent enough to keep total cholesterol under control, keep HDL close, not into, but close to the reference range. And the same for LDL, close to the reference range, but definitely not in the reference range. Citrus bergamot might be potent enough because, generally speaking, during the off-season, fat intake might be a little bit higher, a little bit more poly and monounsaturated fat would help to keep your total cholesterol and HDL and LDL ratio a little bit more favorable. And for most cases, or at least the guys that work with me, estrogen concentrations are going to be a little bit higher, which promotes a favorable HDL and LDL ratio as well. But during a cutting phase, when fat intake is a little bit more restrictive and estradiol concentrations are generally lower to promote fat loss, or at least promote fat loss from stubborn body fat areas, HDL, LDL, total cholesterol might be off the map. So you'll need a red yeast rice, which is the most potent over-the-counter supplement you can use to get LDL in a favorable range. It doesn't raise HDL, but it keeps LDL down, resulting in a lower total cholesterol level. And if that doesn't work, or it's not potent enough because your Trenbolone intake is so high and your serum estradiol concentrations are so low, ezetimibe, or ezetimibe, I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. Leo from Leo Longevity says ezetimibe, and I've been saying ezetimibe. And sometimes you read these cholesterol medications off a piece of paper, and you go with your best guess on how to pronounce it. It's not hypertrophy, it's hypertrophy, Steve. Actually, I got over that a long time ago. Anyway, let's go back to the cholesterol medications. So you might need a statin to keep your cholesterol levels under control, and especially when you start combining Trenbolone with a Masteron or a Winstrol or any of the other DHT derivatives, it doesn't really matter how much cholesterol medication you take, but you're just taking it for damage control. Again, because coronary artery disease, LDL foam cells, etc. Yeah, it's too much to get into this video, but you need a method to keep your cholesterol levels and your lipid panel to as close as a favorable range as possible. Now that pretty much covers it for the supplementations that are required before you add Trenbolone to your PED protocol. I would also recommend you guys to keep Nolvadex on hand just in case, especially during the off-season when serum estradiol concentrations are a little bit higher, even though Trenbolone intake is, considerably moderate. High estradiol and progestogenic activity, gynecomastia. So keep some Nolvadex in hand so you at least be able to block the estradiol receptor. Of course, Nolvadex is not going to do anything to block the progesterone receptor. It's only going to block the estrogen alpha and beta receptors with different levels of affinities. And of course, tamoxifen has a metabolite, which has some pretty potent anti-estrogenic properties as well. So if you let your estrogen go out of control during the off-season and your Trenbolone is there tickling the progesterone receptor, gynecomastia is, very high likelihood, and Nolvadex might be able to mitigate some of these effects. Or you preemptively start selecting a gynecomastia surgeon just in case. That's going to be a significant dig into your finances because, when you're on testosterone, most of the healthcare providers are not going to cover your gynecomastia surgery for you. So I would keep Nolvadex. That's a minimal purchase in case gynecomastia symptoms are being presented to you. And I think that pretty much covers everything you need to purchase before you consider adding Trenbolone to your performance enhancing drug protocol. I know it's going to be a tremendous amount of extra expenses you didn't sign up for, but expenses that are going to have to take place so you can mitigate all of these side effects or keep these side effects under control. Okay, now we got all the disclaimers out of the way and we can get into the dosing protocols. Again, guys, you make sure you have some disposable income because Trenbolone, nobody ever uses Trenbolone by itself. There's always some extra hidden expenses that you probably didn't sign up for. But most of the things that I discussed on this shopping list are pretty much mandatory and very essential when you use Trenbolone. Let's get into the dosings. And if you skipped ahead with the timestamps, shame on you. You should watch the shopping list first. Okay, how to use Trenbolone during the off-season. A very low, moderate dose, considering that testosterone intake is generally higher than Trenbolone during the off-season. Estradiol concentrations are going to be higher because you get some anabolism through the estrogen receptor pathway. Trenbolone up to 1 milligram per 1 pound of body weight or 2 milligrams per 1 kilo of body weight at 10% body fat. You shouldn't be over 12% body fat during the off season. Dirty bulking or perma bulking, no. That's not the correct way. You should be reasonably lean before starting the off season, and you're adding Trenbolone in to keep you lean because it's such a potent nutrient partitioning agent. It also increases IGF-1 sensitivity. So look at it this way. And for the guys that already purchased the off-season cycles with bioidentical hormones where I discuss testosterone, growth hormone, IGF-1, or growth hormone promoting IGF-1 production in the liver, or exogenous IGF-1 use or exogenous insulin use. Neurosteroids are also discussed in that ebook. So in that scenario, when you're during the off-season, your testosterone dosages, your growth hormone dosages are being incrementally increased depending on your rate of progression. Trenbolone would be a suitable inclusion when your growth hormone intake is reasonably high to facilitate a lot of IGF-1 production in the liver because you get synergy with high serum concentrations of IGF-1 and low serum concentrations of Trenbolone. They work very well in synergy for anabolism and, of course, nutrient partitioning while keeping you lean in a caloric surplus. So your Trenbolone intake during the off-season shouldn't exceed 1 milligram per 1 pound of body weight at 10% body fat. So if you're 225 pounds at 10% body fat, that's a maximum of 225 milligrams of Trenbolone per week. If you're 250 pounds, 250 milligrams Trenbolone per week maximum. If you're 270 or 300 pounds, the same amount in your weekly dose of Trenbolone. Your testosterone dosages are going to be way higher, or at least if you follow my protocols, because I feel that test is best. And Trenbolone is an add-on you sprinkle in on top if and only if your growth hormone intake is high to promote IGF-1 production in the liver, or you're using actual exogenous IGF-1 by itself. Or you're using moderate dosages of growth hormone and Lantus, which is a long-acting insulin, which has been shown to increase serum IGF-1 concentrations in combination with growth hormone and by itself as well. In those scenarios, a very moderate, conservative, low dose of Trenbolone is highly beneficial. Now, I have to think about who of my off-season clients are using Trenbolone right now. 0. 0 of my guys are using Trenbolone during the off-season because they get all the effects and all the anabolism, and they prefer not to have any of these side effects, which I discussed previously in many videos in this Trenbolone profile video series. They don't want these side effects, and I highly respect them for that. I never force them to go on Trenbolone, even though it might be beneficial. I like to keep my clients emotionally sane and without all these potential health ramifications further down the line. So none of my clients are using Trenbolone during the off-season. I have coached clients in the past that used Trenbolone during the off-season in combination with a, pretty significant dose of testosterone, let's say 1,000 milligrams per week. They end up at 250 pounds body weight. They're still 10% body fat because they keep their diet under control. They're supplementing, a little bit of exogenous growth hormone, resulting in high serum IGF-1 concentrations, and using Atlantis to push that to the next level. Most of my clients don't use exogenous IGF-1 because of its availability, and if they can source, good generics or even intralectal Iplex IGF-1, growth hormone dosages are generally a little bit lower. Insulin is not part of the game unless they're really, really big. And then I would consider to recommend them to add the Trenbolone in because you're already spending an arm and a leg on intralectal Iplex to raise your IGF-1 concentrations. And then, instead of doing a 3 weeks on protocol where your IGF-1 is high, losing IGF-1 sensitivity, having Trenbolone in that scenario, a low dose, moderate dose, conservative dose of 1 milligram per 1 pound of body weight at 10% body fat, extends the duration of your IGF-1 protocol, maybe double, maybe 1 week extra, 2 weeks extra, until you start to notice that IGF-1 sensitivity goes down and you don't get the favorable nutrient partitioning. So by adding Trenbolone in this off-season scenario where serum IGF-1 concentrations are higher, super physiological than your liver can produce through the stimulation of Lantus or growth hormone, it extends the duration of IGF-1 use. And that's the only scenario, the only case where I would recommend Trenbolone during the off-season. If you guys want to use Trenbolone during the off-season to stay lean and get favorable nutrient partitioning and IGF-1 sensitivity from growth hormone or Lantus, be my guest. You can decide completely for yourself based on all the information that I give you in this Trenbolone video series this one and the one previous. And let me add to that all of my clients are doing daily cardio during the off season as well. Maybe that's 20 minutes, 30 minutes upon waking. And some of my competitors are doing daily posing upon waking instead because that increases your heart rate as well. And it's only about increasing insulin sensitivity and a little bit of caloric expenditure upon waking. So whether they do posing practice or walk on the treadmill or elliptical bike or whatever, that helps to stay lean as well. Adding Trenbolone on top of this off-season protocol with the inclusion of daily cardio or daily posing helps to keep the breathing under control because you increase VO2 max and cardiovascular endurance, which is almost essential when you add Trenbolone in because it reduces cardiovascular endurance and VO2 max tremendously. Another way around that, and a combination, whether that's during the off-season or a cutting phase, is GW1516, also known as Cardarine, which is classified as a SARM, but it's not a SARM. It's a PPAR modulator. Something to say to combine that with telomere because it modulates the PPAR as well. So now you have a method to get your blood pressure under control in case your blood pressure goes high. And you have GW1516 with Cardarine helping you to stay lean during an off-season or a cutting phase, which also improves your cardiovascular endurance because it shifts energy production from carbohydrates to fatty acids. And as the name implies, carbohydrates, carbon hydrated with hydrogen and oxygen, when that's oxidized further, you create a lot of CO2, carbon dioxide, which reduces your cardiovascular endurance because it changes the acidity of your blood. Of course, you can change this blood acidity with, baking soda, but I don't think it's a suitable approach because that's also known to increase your creatinine levels. And Trenbolone is known to increase your creatinine levels. Yeah, I can't recommend that. So if you want to improve your cardiovascular endurance, GW1516, which might compound with a blood pressure medication like telmisartan, and make sure you take carnitine with that as well, not only for the androgen receptors, but to keep this fatty acid oxidation pathway going because you need carnitine to absorb fatty acids into the mitochondria. And of course, when you're taking GW1516, which is a PPAR modulator, and telling to mitochondria to burn fatty acids over glycogen, carnitine requirement increases. And of course, Trenbolone increases carnitine requirement as well, because it's a potent nutrient partitioner and another androgen on top of your testosterone base or your testosterone, masteron, etc. base during a cutting phase. Man, what a mouthful. Okay, so that's during the off-season and methods to use it and incorporate that besides your testosterone base and the rest of your bioidentical hormones. During a cutting phase, it gets a little bit more complicated because you're in a caloric deficit or a steep caloric deficit. But what I do with all of my clients, because of all the terrible health complications that Trenbolone is associated with, you don't really see them at a conservative and moderate dose during the off-season. But even then, I would limit the duration of Trenbolone exposure to 8 weeks. 10 weeks is pushing it at maximum. So 8 to 10 weeks during the off-season and 6 to 8 weeks during a cutting phase. And you add the Trenbolone in, or you can consider adding the Trenbolone in when you've reached 6% body fat, at most 8%, by yourself without using Trenbolone, because this, again, reduces the duration of Trenbolone exposure. And the longer you take Tren, especially at higher dosages, the more negative health ramifications you might get. Immediate negative health ramifications or long-term negative health ramifications. Get yourself down to 8% body fat at least, preferably 6%. That's when I add it in with my clients. At 1 milligram per 1 pound of body weight, and then it slowly increases to 2 milligrams, maybe even 3 milligrams per pound of body weight at 8%, 6%, 4% body fat. So as the body fat levels go down, it's usually accompanied with a reduction in calories and perhaps an increase in cardio. Again, if they do a proper off-season with me and I get their calories sky high while their body fat levels are reasonably low, they don't need to do a tremendous amount of cardio because their metabolism is so high, and that stays high throughout the duration of a cutting phase or contest prep. But I've seen it happen many times in the past. Guys come to me with a horrible metabolism and a way too high body fat percentage. 15% body fat at 2,000 calories per day. It's not a really great pace to start, but they want to start. Oh, bro, I got to get lean for summer and for this festival, and I want to use Tren. Yeah, I used to take those guys, not anymore. But when I used to, I would tell them, okay, I want to increase your calories first, and we can use Trenbolone at the end. Let's say 50% of those guys listened. The other 50% took Trenbolone behind my back and got their coaching fee refunded. That's not my method of incorporating Trenbolone. So ideally, high caloric intake, tapered down according to your body fat levels when it's needed, when you reach a plateau in fat loss, and then when you're 6%, 8% body fat at maximum. Trenbolone comes in at 1 milligram per 1 pound of body weight, and then it might increase to 2 milligrams per 1 pound of body weight, or even 3 milligrams per pound of body weight. So as a direct comparison, let's say you ended up at 250 pounds during the off season and you're incorporating 250 milligrams of Trenbolone per week. You take a significant period off the Trenbolone while you're doing your cutting phase. And you maybe take testosterone or primobolan or boldenone, or you take a low dose of testosterone and get down as lean as possible without any other performance enhancing drug. Then at one point you reach 8% body fat, you're 225 pounds, for example, because you lost a little bit of body fat and a little bit of muscle volume in the meantime, and intestinal mass as well, because you're eating a significant lower amount of calories compared than during the off season. So you're at 225 pounds, 8% body fat, 1 milligram of Trenbolone per pound, 225 milligrams of Trenbolone per week. Let's say at 6% body fat, you're still 225 pounds because now you're recomping, because Trenbolone is such a potent androgen, allowing you to build muscle mass while you're in a caloric deficit. You're still 225 pounds. At 6% body fat, we're increasing the Trenbolone to 2 milligrams per pound of body weight. So now you're at 450 milligrams of Trenbolone per week. And then when you get down to 4%, Trenbolone increases again to 3 milligrams per pound. So let's say you're still 225 pounds of body weight, even though you tremendously decreased the amount of body fat that you have. So now you gained more muscle. In the meantime, 3 milligrams resulting in 675 milligrams of Trenbolone per week. And that's the absolute maximum you should take. Please do not listen to anybody that tells you you need 1,000 milligrams of Trenbolone per week. There's plenty of retarded coaches out there that say you need it, or, forum personas that say you need 1,000 milligrams of Trenbolone. I've done 1,000 milligrams of Trenbolone. And I wish I never have. Because I'm sure I got some long-term health ramifications in the process. And back then, we only had the forums to listen to. And now you have a couple very knowledgeable guys that tell you not to do these stupid experiments by yourself. 3 milligrams per 1 pound of body weight during a cutting phase at maximum. So even if you're 300 pounds at 4% body fat, that's no more than 900 milligrams of Trenbolone per week. And most of these guys that are so genetically blessed to end up at 300 pounds at 4% body fat, I talk with them and they're using 350 milligrams of Trenbolone per week at maximum. Their growth hormone and their IGF-1 or insulin and, a lot of other compounds that we tend to keep a secret at the high level of the competition. Those are all in the mix, but the Trenbolone is not that high. And I know plenty of guys that don't use Trenbolone during the cutting phase. It's not mandatory. It is beneficial, absolutely, during the cutting phase, especially when you're doing a contest and you don't have so much muscle maturity yet. Trenbolone will definitely put muscle maturity on you. And you can, if you keep your skin thinness under control, that will show more pronouncedly. So we'll get into the combination with Masteron and Winstrol a little bit later. So let's say you get your body fat levels very, very low and you're using 2 milligrams of Trenbolone per 1 pound of body weight. If you're 225 pounds, you're using 450 milligrams of Trenbolone per week. You should look pretty good at 6%, 4% body fat. And depending on your skin thickness and the level of the competition, that it's probably more than sufficient, especially if you're finishing this protocol off with a halotestin to increase the muscle hardness, muscle density, and improve muscle maturity at the end. Now, if you're a seasoned competitor with a tremendous amount of muscle maturity, you probably don't need Trenbolone anymore because this muscle maturity is real and hard-earned, and it doesn't have to be simulated with Trenbolone or halotestin. So you'll hear that over the course of several people's career. Oh, 1 year I couldn't get halotestin or Trenbolone, and I did a prep without it, and I still looked good. I still won my show. They probably couldn't have gotten away with that in the beginning because they lacked the muscle maturity and the density and the hardness. But once you've already established that physique and it's hard-earned, Trenbolone is no longer required. And I've proven that with a lot of my clients many times over. They just do a cycle of testosterone and primobolan, maybe a little bit of Winstrol or Masteron, in some cases halotestin at the end. But look at it this way. If you're running your entire contest prep or cutting phase with testosterone and primobolan without any of these side effects that I made videos about, how do you think your blood work is going to be at the end of contest prep? How do you think your mood or your mindset or the inclusion of the people around you, because you didn't turn into this reckless asshole that alienated everybody around you, which is very common with Trenbolone during cutting phase. So an entire cutting phase with testosterone and primo, perhaps Masteron or testosterone, boldenone and Masteron, only requiring 2 weeks of halotestin at the end to add in the hardness and the density and upregulate or improve the muscle maturity for 2 weeks. So now instead of having 8 weeks of Trenbolone alienating everybody around you and turning into a selfish asshole, plus 2 weeks of halotestin, resulting in you being an asshole for 10 weeks. And nobody wants to go with your victory dinner afterwards because they're all gone. They're all gone. They don't want to be in your corner anymore because you're impossible to deal with. The duration of which you're an a-hole is only 2 weeks on halotestin. And if you combine Trenbolone with halotestin, that's maybe 8 weeks or 10 weeks. Yeah. Again, we have to look at the total picture here, not only the trophy or the photo shoot at the end of the tunnel. And yes, contest prep or cutting phase is a tremendous long tunnel until you see the light at the end of the tunnel. Probably 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 3 months, 2 months, 3 months after discontinuing the Trenbolone. You put some body fat back and you've been in a caloric surplus for a while. And then you realize, yeah, I was kind of a and I'm sorry, babe, let me take you out on a holiday. Let's go to Disneyland. Let me make up to you. It will still take months before you realize that. So those are the two scenarios. in which Trenbolone is commonly used by athletes that compete or do an off-season, or use Trenbolone to get shredded for a photo shoot, which I'm not really for. I mean, I've done it many times with just test and primo, or even test alone and a little bit of Superdrol at the end. It's not required, guys. It's really not required, but it is beneficial if you can deal with the side effects and keep that all under control so you don't get any negative health ramifications. Now, what I would like to add during the cutting phase or contest prep is the inclusion of Masteron, which almost go hand in hand with Trenbolone. A lot of people don't know why, so let me explain it to you why that is, why they go hand in hand. Like I mentioned before, Trenbolone through the progesterone receptor increases collagen synthesis. Estradiol through the estrogen receptors, whether that's the alpha or the beta, increases collagen synthesis as well. During the off-season, you'll notice that your skin will thicken. But during a cutting phase or a contest prep, that's definitely not desired. You want your skin as thin as possible. And Trenbolone is always a bit of a trade-off between the skin thickness and the muscle maturity that it facilitates. Now, Masteron not only is a potent anti-estrogen and acts as a temporary aromatase inhibitor in the aromatase enzyme, preventing the aromatization of testosterone into estradiol, but in several in vitro studies, it's also been shown to mitigate some of the gene transcription that estradiol induces. So now you get less collagen synthesis from serum concentrations of estradiol, which are still favorable. You also get less renin and vasopressin activity, reducing your blood pressure slightly by excreting more sodium and excreting more water. And that's why Masteron makes you pee a lot, because it probably downregulates renin and vasopressin levels by mitigating or impairing estradiol-mediated gene transcription, and whether that results in less vasopressin or less renin concentrations within the bloodstream, keeping blood pressure under control and promoting sodium excretion or water excretion in the kidneys, or impairing collagen synthesis, which eventually reduces skin thickness, even though progesterone, the collagen synthesis through the progesterone receptor isn't really blocked. The combination of Masteron and Trenbolone is very favorable, which then probably minimizes the effect that Trenbolone has on thickening the skin through the progesterone collagen synthesis pathway, because it impairs collagen synthesis through the estrogen pathway. So Masteron might be a highly beneficial addition to Trenbolone during the cutting phase or contest prep in a 1-to-1 ratio, so that also results in 1 milligram per 1 pound of body weight at whatever body fat percentage you end up at during a cutting phase or contest prep. So that's 8%, 6%, 4%, whatever. When you add the Trenbolone in, a comparable dose of Masteron, propionate probably, because you get more bang for your buck, right? 1 milligram Trenbolone acetate for 1 pound of body weight, and the same amount of Masteron propionate on top. So if you're 225 pounds, let's say you ended up with 500 milligrams of testosterone propionate per week with daily injections because you want to keep your estradiol concentrations under control. 225 milligrams of Trenbolone on top, plus 225 milligrams of Masteron propionate, which will result in a significant amount of body recomposition, given that your diet is under control and your cardio is in place, and perhaps you're using a couple fat burners like GW1516 or Clenbuterol. Now, that's a good segue. That's a good segue because Clenbuterol and Trenbolone is a very potent recipe for heart remodeling. That will be a whole video on itself, so we're not going to go in depth. Just look at it this way. Stimulating the beta receptors on the heart will result in an elevated heart rate. Trenbolone is a very potent anabolic and androgenic compound. So by stimulating the heart, elevating your resting heart rate for the entirety of the day for weeks to maybe even months on end, and combining that with Trenbolone, that's very potent for left ventricle heart enlargement, especially considering that most guys will end up with a little bit of Cabergoline towards the end as well. So that's also been shown to induce left ventricle heart enlargement. So it's too much to get into, but guys, just keep it under consideration. Trenbolone, Clenbuterol, left ventricle heart enlargement. and Cabergoline on top, that's a lot more left ventricle heart enlargement, which might not be able to undo for years on end, or you need a significant amount of nebivolol and ubiquinol and shilajit fulvic acid to undone this heart remodeling that you got in yourself for a plastic trophy. So that it is a very potent combination for fat loss. I would prefer Trenbolone and Cardarine instead of Trenbolone and Clenbuterol, or use Clenbuterol to get down to 6% body fat. Then you take the Clenbuterol out, you switch to Cardarine, and then you add the Trenbolone in, because you don't want the heart remodeling, and GW1516 has not been associated with heart remodeling, but Trenbolone has. So now you only have one compound that could potentially induce left ventricle heart enlargement. And the Clenbuterol and the Cabergoline you just leave in your performance-enhancing drug drawer. Last compound, which is comparable to Masteron, is Winstrol, which it hasn't been shown in studies that it potentiates some of this estradiol gene transcription reduction that Masteron was shown to do in several studies. But I speculate that Winstrol gives comparable effects on estradiol-mediated gene transcription, because you see the same amount of impaired collagen synthesis with Winstrol. You see similar reduction of skin thickness, and I feel that Winstrol is even more potent in reducing skin thickness, especially if collagen type 2 and 3 is reduced or removed from the diet. So you switch to an all-fish diet, which helps to reduce skin thickness by itself, because you're minimizing collagen to collagen type 1. So your all-fish diet, Winstrol, perhaps Masteron and Trenbolone, will probably result in the thinnest possible skin until you remove the Trenbolone, and then you have a way thinner skin because you're no longer mediating this pathway through the progesterone receptor for collagen synthesis in the skin. Again, you're losing a little bit of the anabolic benefit through the progesterone receptor. So again, it's a trade-off. So Winstrol might be a very potent combination, and I would consider a 1-to-1 ratio as well. So let's say 225 pounds, 1 milligram per pound of body weight, 225 milligrams of Trenbolone acetate per week, plus 225 milligrams of Masteron propionate per week on top, plus 225 milligrams of oral Winstrol or injectable Winstrol on top. And that should be more than enough. More than enough to get you nasty, peeled, freaky, shredded, dense AF at 225 pounds of body weight. And if you absolutely must, you increase the Trenbolone, the Masteron, and the Winstrol to 2 milligrams per 1 pound of body weight. And lastly, if absolutely necessary, and your calories are, borderline suicidal because you're starving all day and you're wondering, why the hell am I doing this to myself? If you reach that point, that usually occurs around 4% body fat, and you need to remove the last little bit of fat, which at the amateur levels, nobody's going to notice, but at the professional levels or the world championships levels or the universe levels, the judges will notice. 4% body fat, caloric intake perhaps below basal metabolic rate. Yeah, then Trenbolone, Masteron, and Winstrol can go up to 3 milligrams per 1 pound of body weight. Now, let's say testosterone in that sense is 500 milligrams per week. That's 675 milligrams of Trenbolone acetate, 675 milligrams of Masteron propionate, and 675 milligrams of Winstrol suspension or oral Winstrol. Now, everybody's going to round that up. 700 Tren, 700 Masteron, 700 Winstrol. Yeah, I'm guilty of recommending this as well because of injection convenience. Again, limit your exposure to your duration of 4 weeks at maximum at these dosages. It is a lot of androgens and it's a lot of potential for side effects. If there's something to win, it might be warranted. But if you're doing this recreationally, just stay clear, man. Really, stay clear of Trenbolone. Because if you're just doing this for a photo shoot, I don't feel it's worth it. So if you're doing a cutting phase, there's much better compounds out there. And if you're doing a contest prep or you're during the off season, trying to make as many approvals as you can for the next contest season, in those cases, Trenbolone use is warranted. until you get an insane amount of muscle mass because you've been training for such a long time. And then Trenbolone is no longer required. And I really hope that helps, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching during this Trenbolone profile video series. Vigorous crew, you made it to the end. I'm 100% sure, so you know what to do. Like, share, subscribe. Comment again for the algorithm. I'm sure you already commented and you already liked, but let me just remind you again. Again, thank you guys so much for watching and sticking with me through this entire Trenbolone profile video series, and I'll see you in the next video.